story begins with the protagonist waking up in another body, then realizing he had to deliver certain plans and that the deadline was the next day. However, the protagonist didn't realize he was in another body and in another world. Suddenly, an old man approaches him, calling him His Majesty. The protagonist goes into shock because all the memories of the body he had just received came rushing back to him. Now, the protag's new identity was that of the fourth prince of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, Roland Wimbledon. The current king decreed that the heirs would fight for the throne and whoever won would become the successor. He established several territories under the rule of his 5 adult children, and based on the way they governed, he would decide who would be the real successor. This competition would last for 5 years. According to Prince Roland's memories, the first prince had greater strength than average, the second prince had greater wealth, the third princess had greater military strength, the fifth princess had greater intelligence, and the fourth prince had nothing outstanding, spending his time drinking and indulging in pleasures. As a result, he was assigned the border town, a place where even the birds didn't want to defecate. While he was thinking about his situation, the old man next to him told him that it was time for the execution of someone. Then Roland remembered that he was in the square to execute a witch. However, when he saw the woman, he commented that the town was full of closed-minded people, so he cancelled the execution and announced that he was tired and that they would do it another day. The spectators were very surprised by the protag's actions, and even the head of the knights urged him to continue with the execution because if more time passed, the woman's friends might come to rescue her. However, Roland had already made his decision and left, telling them that even if other women came, it would be better because they would catch them in the act. Roland went to his mansion, locked himself in his office, and began to assimilate everything that had happened since his death until his reincarnation in another world. From now on, he would be Prince Roland. After a while, Roland went to see the person who was locked up in prison. The head of the knights was afraid that the prince would see her, but Roland mocked him because the great knight was afraid of a young girl. When he arrived at the cell, a beautiful-looking young girl made Roland blush, but the knight intervened and told him not to approach. Roland asked the girl her name, but the knight interrupted again. To stop the interruption, Roland hit him and continued with his questions. The girl began to tell him that she worked in the mine with her father, but one day, the mine collapsed and her father was trapped under the rubble. Then, a fellow miner wanted to take advantage of the situation to steal her valuable belongings, but he was discovered, and they engaged in a fight. In the fight, the thief managed to defeat his opponent, and when he was about to execute him, the girl, in a moment of desperation, awakened an unknown power that incinerated the thief. The person she saved was frightened and began screaming that she was a witch. However, she asked them not to tell anyone what they had seen. Roland then believed that the young woman had been reported by the people who saw her power, but she dismissed that and said that her father had reported her. The old man who accompanied them exclaimed that there was no turning back and that they had to execute her immediately. For his part, he said that he wanted to see that acclaimed power. The young woman asked him if he was sure about that, and Roland said yes and took away the Retribution Stone. The Retribution Stone is an artifact that inhibits the power of witches. From the girl's body, powerful and terrifying flames of fire emerged. Roland was not frightened. Instead, he was amazed and began thinking about how he would use his ability. He decided to hire Miss Anna, and the old man was surprised and began telling Roland not to do it and that it was not right. However, Roland did not listen and told him to bring an employment contract immediately. He wanted to establish a working relationship with Miss Anna and prepare the accommodation so that the matter would go unnoticed. Roland told the old man that they had to simulate the death of a person so that there would be no misunderstanding. The old man made the preparations and executed them according to the prince's orders, but he still believed that saving Miss Anna was too risky. Roland said that the frontier town was not a good place, and if they were honest, the place was horrible. Without money and military strength, they had no chance of winning the throne, so they had to seek alternative measures. That's why he summoned the young woman, who was already in the castle. Miss Anna was cleaned, dressed, and taken before Prince Roland. The prince was outside the palace in a cabin he had ordered to be built. The young woman arrived wearing a maid's clothes, which the prince had personally selected. Roland explained to the young woman that he was not afraid of her or her power, and contrary to what she believed, he told her that if she used her abilities correctly, she could help develop the town. But first, she had to control her power. That's why he had ordered the construction of that cabin, as it would serve as a free space where she could practice tirelessly without being disturbed. Roland watched the young Anna's training every day. She kept striving to control her power. Then suddenly, the old man reported to Roland that the patrol squad had found traces of demon beasts, and the demon months would begin early this year. Roland asked what the demon months were. And the old man told him that the demon months begin when the snow starts to fall, that is, in the winter season. It is believed that during those months, the gates of hell in the middle of the mountains open and dangerous beasts emerge. That's why the frontier town has to migrate to the long fortress. Upon this, the prince was surprised and commented that this represented a problem. He decided to form a squadron and ordered the old man to gather the guards and local hunters at tea time. Roland told Anna to tell him more about the demon months. She recounted that, unlike the nobles, for those of lower class, those months were truly a nightmare they had to endure year after year. Every year, the frontier town had to take the minerals excavated from the mine to Longsong Fortress in exchange for food and some royal gold. Additionally, they stayed in a temporary settlement until winter ended. 2 years ago, winter was delayed for over 4 months, and the rulers of Stronghold told them that the minerals they had given covered only 3 months. If they wanted more food, they would have to bring more minerals, which was impossible because winter was still present. As a result, many people harassed their companions, and some died due to food shortages. Anna told Roland that her father protected her a lot, but once he found out she was a witch, he sold her for 25 royal golds because he wanted to continue living his life. Roland made a statement that those days and months would never return and went to find the old man at the government affairs office. The old man had gathered the guards, Brian, and a veteran hunter who had achieved the feat of killing a demon beast. Roland began talking to them and asked if all the beasts could really be killed. Then the hunter named Iron Axe answered that he had already killed 2 demon beasts in the past. One was a boar type, and the other was similar to a wolf. He declared that simple beasts were not as dangerous and could be killed. The problem was hybrid beasts because their bodies were more resistant and fierce. But according to what the knight said, hybrid beasts were rare because only 2 or 3 species appeared throughout winter. Having heard that, Roland said he would stay in the frontier town. As expected, the knight scolded Roland, saying that was not an option. If he wanted to live, he had to go to the fortress. Roland said he would build a wall to protect the town. Now we move to the Blue Water Harbor in Grey Castle. There was the third princess, Garcia Wimbledon, observing the sea while feeling the fresh winter air. Returning to her castle, the princess said she did not expect her father to play those kinds of games. But using all her strength, she was sure she would beat her second brother, her father's favorite. In the conversation, the guard revealed that certain tricks had failed because they had received news from the frontier town and confirmed that Prince Roland was still alive. Therefore, the assassination plan was thwarted. On her part, Princess Garcia was a bit disappointed that her useless brother Roland was still alive, but she still said that the person in charge of the job should take advantage of the winter months to finish the job. On the other hand, a teacher named Carl was dreaming about Miss Anna since he was close to her, but he woke up scared because he couldn't save her from the gallows. He believed that Anna was a pure girl who didn't deserve execution. While he was thinking that, a girl with an angelic appearance named Nana said her body felt strange and, with tears in her eyes, asked if she would also be hanged like her friend. The teacher Carl replied that he would protect her. Carl went out to the village to walk and clear his mind. While doing so, he thought of a method to protect the sweet Nana. By chance, he learned that Prince Roland was hiring people to do construction work in the border village. Then, he thought that the person who would help him protect Nana would be His Majesty Roland, as he knew that the prince detested the church. However, he also thought that there was a risk of being taken as a protector of witches and being sent to the gallows, but it was a risk he needed to take. On the other hand, Prince Roland was supervising the creation of cement to build the wall quickly. The wall would be 15 feet tall and 6 feet wide. The person in charge of producing the cement was the young Anna, as she was the only person with the ability to do it. After a while, Anna finished creating the cement, and several stones were joined with it to test it. To their surprise, the cement was ready to use. In the mind of Prince Roland, the growth and strengthening of the village would be done with the skills of the witches. The construction of the wall that would protect the village from demonic beasts in winter began. Many workers came due to the recruitment notice published in the village square. Roland commented that Anna alone would not be enough to produce cement on a large scale, so more labor was needed. Besides, she was not a disposable tool but an engine that would drive civilization forward. The first step was to dig the trench, and Prince Roland took the initiative to show all the workers how to dig so that it would be faster and more precise. Due to his action, the workers became motivated. However, although Roland understood civil engineering, he needed a professional in the field for future projects that would develop the border village. As if they had called Professor Carroll, who was a construction professional, he presented himself at the government affairs office in the village to ask for a job as a stonemason. Roland received him, but Carl was surprised when he saw Miss Anna. In his excitement, Roland ordered the knight to block the door and not let the teacher leave. To everyone's surprise, the teacher only knelt and apologized to the young woman, saying that he hadn't been able to protect her but was grateful that she was still alive. Roland asked the teacher to calm down and explain things. After a good while of crying, The teacher calmed down and began to recount that he had been part of the Stonecutters Association of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, but now he was just a village teacher and Anna was his student. He was grateful that she was alive. Still, he tells Roland that he doesn't care about the reasons why he took Anna as his concubine. The fact was that she was alive, and he was grateful for it. In the professor's thoughts, he had decided to make a request to the prince. The request was for him to also take Nana as his concubine to protect her. Roland told him to bring the girl to verify her abilities, and if she really was a witch, she would be protected and no harm would come to her. Furthermore, Roland emphasized that he would make the border town a developed and prosperous place, but he would need the help of people like Anda. After the conversation, Roland returned to the matter at hand and told the professor that he planned to build a wall to defend themselves from the demonic beasts. He then asked Carl if he had really been a member of the kingdom's stonemasons society. The professor confirmed it, so Roland told him that he would be in charge of the project from that moment on. After some time, Carl brought sweet Nana before Roland. The first words of the angelic Nana were, "I'm going to die." However, Roland told her that it would not happen since her friend Anna was there too. The girl introduced herself as Nana Pine and ran towards where Anna was. After a while, Roland began to talk with the young Nana. She recounted that she had never seen a demon, so she did not know where those powers came from or what their functions were. She only knew that a week ago, she found a wounded animal, and when she tried to help it, bubbles started coming out of her body, helping the animal. Roland then asked the knight to bring a chicken to test Nana's abilities. The knight returned with the chicken, and Roland made a cut and asked Nana to use her ability. After a long practice and the sacrifice of the chicken that ended up in the kitchen, Roland realized Nana's abilities, which consisted of healing the injured parts of the body. However, she could not generate new limbs. She could only join the cut parts, but once a person died, the ability would not work since death is the end. Roland stopped thinking about it for the moment and invited the young Nana and Anna to eat at dusk. Nana said goodbye to Roland and promised to come back the next day. Anna asked Roland why he had not let Nana stay in the castle. Roland understood that she still had relatives, and as long as they did not know about her abilities, he would not do anything that would compromise the girl with the construction of the wall, now under the supervision of Carl. Roland had free time, sometimes going for a walk in the mine and supervising the progress of the wall. After that, he spent the afternoon with Anna and Nana, watching them practice their abilities while he drank tea. However, the old man suddenly gave him some news that his savings would soon run out. Therefore, Roland decided to look for money to continue developing the town. The old man believed that Prince Roland was a completely different person than the one he had met in the Kingdom of Grey Castle, given his bad reputation and behavior, which was not that of a nobleman. The obedience of the old man towards Roland was due to the fact that King Wimbledon III, the father of the prince, had promised him an official position as Minister of Finance in the border town. Otherwise, he would have retired long ago. Additionally, the old man believed that the prince's change was due to his interaction with the witch Hannah, whom he had saved. On the other hand, Roland believed that building in the town was expensive, and relying on his personal funds would not be enough. However, the town's profits were dismal, with most of the capital coming from the taxes of the few existing businesses. During the winter, they had to exchange minerals from the mine for provisions with the Alanson fortress, which Roland considered unfair. They needed to improve the town's finances as soon as possible. Now, we moved to the town's port, where two emissaries from the Longsong fortress had arrived to exchange minerals for food. However, they found that the lot where the minerals should be was empty. They then went to Roland's mansion, and on the way, they noticed a certain ship from the city of Milo leaving the port. This generated some doubt about the Longsong fortress emissaries and ambassadors, as they wanted to maintain a monopoly on minerals. If Roland had considered having relations with other cities, it would take away a very lucrative business. Upon arriving at the mansion, the ambassador was invited to dinner, but what was curious was that he did not know how to use the common wooden chopsticks used by the Chinese. He watched Roland with amazement, and when he tried to eat with them, he dropped the food. After dinner, the ambassador told the prince that he had come for the mineral lot, but there was nothing there. Roland replied that a landslide in the mine had prevented them from continuing with the extraction. However, the little that had been extracted before the landslide, if exchanged with the fortress, would only be enough for 2 months of winter. Roland mentioned that 2 years ago, the border town had problems with food due to the winter's delay, which caused many citizens to die of hunger. The ambassador apologized and promised to talk to the fortress families to give them a month's worth of food on credit, which they would have to pay back when the mine was restored. For his part, Roland said that if they sold to the city of Willow, they wouldn't have to worry about that, as they paid in real gold and sold them the provisions they needed. In contrast, in the fortress, they would have to exchange products for minerals, which was more expensive. The ambassador began to think and remembered that his father had told him that Prince Roland was like a pig and considered him trash, but it was the opposite. In the end, he decided to make a slightly higher proposal than the city of Willow, but it had to be approved by the fortress families. Although the ambassador wanted to convince Roland that it was best to do business with the fortress, due to the city of Willow being quite far away and taking refuge there during the winter not being good, to his surprise, Roland said he would not leave the town during the winter. In addition, he declared that the border town would be a new symbol for the Kingdom of Grey Castle. The young ambassador was surprised and asked Roland why he would stay in the town, to which he responded that he was building a wall that would protect the town from beasts. After finishing the conversation, Roland went to sleep in his room and reflected on what had happened in his day. However, a presence scared him as he searched for it. He noticed a certain woman sitting on his bed. Roland thought she was a killer and tried to escape, but the woman stopped him and told him that she just wanted to talk to him and he didn't have to worry. Roland asked for the name of the mysterious woman, and she replied that she didn't have one and that they should just call her Nightingale. She thanked Roland for taking care of the witches and explained that the reason for her sudden visit was for the 2 young witches who were in the town. She had been observing Roland for over a week and had decided to take the young witches with her. Upon hearing this, Roland strongly opposed it and argued that they had a good life in the town. Nightingale replied that she would take them to the Witch Association, where they belonged. However, Roland continued to object and argued that winter was approaching and the demon beasts would be lurking, which was reason enough not to take them away. Roland suggested that the association come to the border town to spend the winter, and when it was over, they could go find their holy mountain. The woman continued to say that the witches wouldn't fit in the town, and if the prince didn't hate them, the church would eventually find out and come to execute them. Another reason was that Miss Anna was already entering adulthood, and during the months of the demon, or winter, witches suffered from the demon's torture, which devoured their bodies. If the witch could endure it, they could recover in a few days, but those who couldn't endure it would die from the constant torture. Therefore, that was one of the reasons why witches were seen as the incarnation of evil. After hearing this, Roland decided to go for Anna and tell her the whole story, and if she wanted to leave, he wouldn't object. However, Anna simply didn't want to leave the town because she wanted to stay by Roland's side. As for her adulthood, she said she would overcome it and not die. Nightingale decided to stay to keep an eye on Anna when her time came to pass the adulthood test. When they finished talking, Nightingale left, and Roland told young Anna to go back to sleep since it was still early morning. The next day, Roland met with all the townspeople in the town square and told them that an ambassador from the Longsong Fortress had come for the exchange of minerals, but he had refused to negotiate another month of provisions for the winter, which was unfair. As a result, relations had ended and they could not take refuge in the fortress. However, he also mentioned that he had already sold the minerals to the city of Willow and had bought enough food for the whole winter. Now, what was left was to prepare for the winter in the town. Although the people were scared, Roland gave a speech and convinced them to fight for their town. They all accepted the proposal, and in the fortress, the nobles laughed at Roland for being a fool and not negotiating with them. They also predicted that his wall would not serve and he would end up fleeing to the fortress. The count in charge mentioned that the border town was his territory, and he would not allow a simple prince to do as he pleased. Returning to the border town, Roland showed the Knight Commander his new invention, which was a steam engine made with Anna's help, as she melted the metal to make the plates. This engine would be the driving force that humanity needed to achieve its first industrial revolution. Roland demonstrated the steam engine, and Anna was in charge of igniting it. The amazed knight imagined how useful it would be, and Roland thought that with the engine built, his plans for progress had taken a big step towards success. Later that night, the prince went to his room and noticed that someone familiar was sitting on his bed. It was Nightingale, and she was holding the plans for Roland's steam engine. She asked what their function was, and Roland mentioned their functionality. The woman said she would take the plans to the association, but it would not be for free. She gave Roland a piece of paper from her chest, which was a letter sent to a servant in the mansion. The letter stated that the servant should not repeat her previous mistake and had to eliminate Roland in the chaos of winter. Although there was no sender, Roland knew it was one of his brothers. Nightingale offered to help him discover who had sent the note, and in exchange, she would accept the steam engine plans as payment. Roland accepted, and that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you've made it to this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to get here. So, comment the word king in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. That being said, see you in the next video.